Hey guys, so I came across this news about the Gallup poll that they did on the American people about trans LGBTQ. They were asking people what they thought about trans, basically trans, and the pride LGBT stuff. So let's check this stuff out. I just want to know what the results say.
In a new Gallup poll, 69% of Americans say transgender athletes should only be able to play on the teams that match their birth gender. This is reportedly a 7-point shift toward that position since 2021, which was at 62% then. This shift was also seen among Democrats, with 41% holding that viewpoint in 2021, 48% holding it now.
Also in the poll, 55% of Americans say that changing one's gender is morally wrong, while 43% consider it morally acceptable. When Gallup asked this question in 2021, 51% saw changing one's gender as morally wrong, and 46% said it was morally acceptable. Editor-in-chief of Gallup, Mohammed Yunus, joins us now to discuss these findings.
So 55% says it's morally wrong. 55%, so which is most? That's interesting. Anyway, let's keep going.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. So tell us more about what you think were the big findings of this poll. Obviously, this is an issue we talk a lot on the show about, seems to really animate the conservative movement right now. Honestly, conservative media very much covering gender issues, gender controversies, athletes. What are the takeaways?
The takeaways with this poll are certainly the two you mentioned, but also to keep in mind that this is a poll that also included questions about political and social identity. And we saw a relative high in Americans describing themselves as socially conservative. It's also notable that on both measures, both the moral acceptability and participation in sports, Americans are actually less accepting, if you will, than they were the last time we asked the question. So 55% of Americans.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that just interesting? Americans now are less accepting of this stuff. And who could guess why that is? When you're shoving it in people's faces, when you're trying to, teach this in school, at work, like you can't escape it. It's everywhere. What do you think people are going to do? Like, what do you think people are going to do exactly? Put up with it? Give me a break.
Currently say it's morally wrong to change one's gender, but only 39% of Americans say they personally know somebody who's told them, a coworker, a friend, a colleague, a family member that's told them that they're transgender. So there's still the vast majority, if you will, of Americans still haven't made that personal connection. I think the other thing that's really important here is we see a difference in people's perceptions in terms of the acceptance morally, whether or not they know somebody who is transgender, having a more accepting impact. And that's obviously, we know that from just decades of social research.
And all of the gay marriage statistics.
And it's true with attitudes about immigrants. It's true here in the United States and really globally. It's a very common a theory in sociological research that if you know somebody from an other group, you're more likely to have more positive views or a deeper understanding of that group than people who say they haven't. So we still have a lot of Americans that say they haven't met somebody.
Right.
But an important distinction is, despite knowing someone who's transgender or not personally, people are less favorable to this participation in sports aspect. And it is interesting that even Democrats, who are 7 in 10 say it's morally acceptable, 8 and 10 say it's morally acceptable, 7 and 10 say it's okay to participate in the sports, they're actually far less likely to do so when it comes to sports.
Before we get to sports, I just want to ask you about the framing of the first question, the morally acceptable. Was there any question about whether or not Americans should be permitted to do it, regardless of what other Americans think of it? Because the real issue here politically, right, is that there are laws being...
You see what she's trying to do? Now she's trying to rephrase the question. The results are there. Most Americans think that you shouldn't be transitioning. Now she's trying to say, okay, fuck their opinions, fuck what they think. Are you still going to do it? Can you, man. Okay, let's keep
being
going.
passed to prevent people from doing what they want to do with their own bodies in their own consultation with their medical providers. You know, I wonder if there's any questioning that gets at that more libertarian conceit of whether or not people should be allowed to. I can sit here and say I might not think it's morally acceptable for families to make their kids be vegan or to beat their kids or any number of things, to circumcise their kids. But if you ask me, do I think that people should be allowed to do those, it would be a very different answer, right?
Yeah, and we didn't ask that question in this poll, and that is a really important distinction, that the moral acceptability of a group doesn't necessarily directly mean that people are promoting discrimination against that group. You know, another really strong example of that is the favorability of China. So right now in America, China is viewed as the #1 enemy of the United States. And you could say, wow, well, that is really concerning because that means there's a lot of anti-Asian hate out there. And that's true, but they also have a very favorable view of countries like Japan and South Korea. So it really depends on the question you're specifically asking. We didn't ask about those legal rights, but when it comes to morality versus fairness and participation in sports, there is definitely a divide, even amongst people who are left of center, on whether or not that should be taking place.
I have seen, I think, more criticism from conservatives of it's Pride Month, of kind of just the LGBT category this year than I can recall in previous years. I think there had been a sense that the right, except for very ardent religious conservatives, had largely given up on relitigating gay marriage, things of that nature, you know, except when it still going to fight the cake baking case where it really clashes with freedom of religion and freedom of expression, maybe. But those issues were settled and won. And, you know, most Americans, even a lot of Americans on the right, agreed with that. Based on reading your poll results, my perception would be that the trans category and the sort of the disinterest in including them in sports that even many Democrats have, is that like dragging down the entire LGBT category, you know, back toward levels of non-acceptance that were, you know, have last witnessed back in the aughts?
We don't see that in the numbers. So whether or not people are accepting of gay marriage, for example, is something we've been asking about for decades. Right now, 7 in 10 Americans support view being homosexual as morally acceptable, and even larger percentages support gay marriage. And we've seen huge shifts over just the past 30 years on those. So, you know, as again, going back to who you know and how it impacts your views, as more Americans inform themselves on what does it mean to be transgender? What does it mean to receive gender affirming care? We know from other research we've done with transgender respondents that a relative minority, about 13% of those who identify as transgender in the United States, have received some kind of gender affirming care. So is the conversation about transgender identity being hijacked, if you will, by one aspect or experience of being transgender in America, and how that's impacting the political conversation is notable. Again, of course, this is happening in a time when major abortion established law has been overturned with Dobbs. And in this same survey, we also asked about attitudes about abortion. So the left, you know, had this moment where voters really highlighted that abortion was suddenly a more important issue after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Now the right basically has this issue, this idea that most Americans don't really understand or try to get their minds around what it means to be transgender and how to participate in things like sports. I think we're going to see both of those issues brought to the fore in this coming election.
Yeah, I do think that.
All right. Now they're trying to put nuances to everything, because I don't think that they expected to have this result. Me personally, I didn't think that they believe that this was how the American people felt about all this stuff. But why wouldn't American people feel this way though? They are saying, and the guy was saying, talking about most people haven't experienced or met a trans or people in the LGBT. They're everywhere. What are you talking about? You see it everywhere. You see it at your job, they're in schools, you see it in movies, you see it in music, you see it on social media. Where can't you see it? You see the pride flags all over the place. As soon as you step outside the house, You see pride everywhere. What are you talking about? We haven't experienced this before. We haven't seen. What are you talking about? What do you like? What do you mean? We haven't seen. Go to Libs of TikTok. You see a bunch of them, a whole host of them with their blue hair, pink hair, pierced faces. They are all over the place. What are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? This is crazy. Now they're trying to put nuances to it, talking about bringing up abortions. What does abortion have to do with this poll? Like, I don't understand the connection to it. Abortions and being trans. Listen, as long as I don't care what people do with their body, that's fine. But I guess when you start seeing it happening to children, it starts hitting home because it could be your child. You could send your child to school and then they come back thinking about something completely different, telling you that they think that they're a different gender. It is a thing. It is an actual fear now. It wasn't supposed to be. I don't care. Like back in the day, my dad never really came to my school to know what they taught or to know who the teachers are. But that is something that I have to do now because you don't know. You never know. You never know who the hell is teaching your child. Anyway, yeah. So, well, I've seen the poll. 69% of Americans think trans athletes shouldn't play on birth gender team. Well, basically shouldn't play in the team that they claim that their gender fits. I mean, most people on the planet think this way, but the West, we got to debate. We got to have nuance. Jesus Christ. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and please subscribe.